Hello, and welcome to the first video walking through some of the main features of Python's Pygame language. So just a quick overview of the videos in this sequence in case you only want to watch certain ones. This one is just going to be an overview of Pygame, how to install it, and how to set up Pygame files. The second one will go through graphics and images. The third one will deal with collecting user input. The fourth one, basic animation. And the fifth is just a demo that ties a lot of this all together. So let's get started. So our overall goals for today in this series of videos, what are we going to be doing? We will be building a game that models the complex interactions between dogs and squirrels. That's what we want to do. Be able to capture all of the nuance in this amazing natural phenomenon. And how are we going to do it? Well, we're going to employ Python's Pygame module. So that's what we want to do. And a general approach that we're going to take is we're going to keep our level of understanding above the abstraction barrier. So what does that mean? Well, first, we don't need to understand exactly how all of the Pygame functions work in order to use them. We need to understand things like what are the inputs and what are the outputs, but we don't need to look under the hood and see how they're implemented in order to call them. We don't even really need to understand all the nuance behind them, like what exactly the various objects in Pygame are. We just need to understand the basics of how these things work. And second, we don't need to understand the entire Pygame language or Pygame library just to use a small subset of it. If all you want to do is make an image appear in a window, you don't need to read through 10 pages of docs about Pygame just to figure out how to do that one thing. So we're only going to learn relevant pieces of Pygame to accomplishing our tasks. So we're going to keep our understanding above the abstraction barrier, and this is something I recommend you do as you're working on your own projects, investigating more of Pygame, or investigating any other Python modules you might want to use. You don't need to understand the entire module just to use select pieces of it. Okay, so an overview of Pygame. What is Pygame? Well, Pygame is a part of the Python language. It's an external library that was authored specifically for making games. It was, as I said, designed for making multimedia projects. It includes computer graphics and sound effects. We will talk about computer graphics today. If you want to learn about sound effects, you can read up on that on your own. It's used a lot in making video games, as some of you might be doing. It is compatible with all operating systems. And as I said, we're only going to talk about graphics today. You can learn about sound effects and videos and other wild things in the documentation. So how do you install Pygame? Well, first note that Pygame is not automatically installed when you install Python. Some things are, like you can just use Python's built-in sum function or something. If you just turn on Python and try to type pygame.image.load, you're going to get an error message. That's not a built-in function. You have to first install Pygame on your machine. So you should type the command pip install Pygame into the command line, and that will download the Pygame package onto your machine. Now, a few notes, because this can get a little messy. If you're using a Mac, you might need to use pip3 install Pygame instead of pip, so I don't know, try both. If you run into some other error when you're trying to install it, just post on Piazza, talk to a TA. Occasionally pip can be annoying, but for most of you this should work without error. An important thing is that you'll probably need Python version 3.6 or later for Pygame to work on your machine. Most of you probably have this because you downloaded Python for the first time in our lab and you got that version. But if you're working with an earlier version, you might have to update it or try some sort of version management system like Anaconda. And again, if you're really having issues with that, post on Piazza and we can figure out how to get it to work. So you have Pygame. You download it. Now you can use it. You can write Pygame functions in your files and they'll work. But you need to write a few extra things in your Python file that you make in your text editor that you wouldn't normally write if you were just, using the print function and doing standard things in Python. So at the top of your file, you'll need to write first import Pygame. And what this is going to do is just tell your computer when it executes the file, we're going to use this external module called Pygame, give me access to all the functions. That's basically what it's doing. You have to have this at the top. And then you're going to need to write pygame.init. And what this does is initialize the module. It gets all of the objects within the Pygame module up and running so you can use them later. Don't worry too much about what this does or how it works. Again, we're keeping our understanding above the abstraction barrier. We don't need to understand what to do with this. Just know that you have to write this at the top of your file or you'll have problems later. Then second, you'll also want to write something at the very bottom of your file whenever you're working with Pygame, and that's pygame.quit, which will shut down Pygame properly, make sure that everything closes, and also close the display window. As we'll see later, there's a display window associated with Pygame where things, animations and images are displayed. And if you don't type pygame.quit, that won't close properly. So you should always have this at the very bottom, last thing in your file. And yeah, that's what I just said.